Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the October Commission meeting in Prineville. We have 6 commissioners with us this morning. Commissioner Anderson has a business conflict, and is excused. And so as chairman, I'll call this meeting to order, and we'll turn to the director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before we begin, just wanted to mention and thank the staff for their work on the tour yesterday. I think that was a great look at some of the important fish-related things that are going on here in Central Oregon. And as we kick off today, then under our director's report, we did provide you field reports in written form, as has been our standard practice. I do have Erica Kleiner here to present the expenditure report. Erica is on the agenda later, and so we felt that rather than have Cameron Smith travel here just to present this report, we'd have Erica go ahead and do it. So, Erica, there she is. Erica is the administrator of our Management Resources Division, and she's also on special assignment here for the next year or so as we transition to a new point-of-sale licensing system. So she's leading our efforts with business process improvement and then actual procurement of the new system. Erica, go ahead. Thanks.
Sure. Chair Finley and members of the Commission, for the record, I'm Erica Kleiner, Administrator of the newly formed Management Resources Division. It's my first meeting, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Director Melcher stated, I'm here today to present the 2017-19 financial report on behalf of our Deputy Director for Administration, Cameron Smith. So with that, I'll jump right in. If you turn your attention to the financial report that's attached to the memorandum that was provided by Cameron, there's a few notes I want to make about the financial report. The first is that these numbers are preliminary, so our accounting period, our closeout process hasn't closed yet. We have until December to do so, so just know that these numbers aren't final. As you can see on the financial report, there are 2 months of actuals included, both July and August, and for those months of actuals, we're very much operating within our budgeted projections. In terms of revenue, our economist has just started to sort through where we are in 2017, and he's indicating that we should expect some conservative license numbers in comparison to 2016. Very, very slim margin there, though, less than 1% difference from 2016. And he expects this to be due to some factors he couldn't have reasonably predicted, fires and salmon run. I also want to give you some budget development process updates. Our 2017-19 budget documents have been turned into the Department of Administrative Services and the Legislative Fiscal Office. That is the culmination of a lot of work by staff and kind of a big accomplishment for the department, so that process is complete. The 2017-19 budget did make its way through the technical audit process, and there were no changes from what was presented to you in June. So that final budget is still just under our current service level. The LAB documents were just posted to the department's public website, so for public visibility, those are out there. I wanted to make note of that as well. And then we're gearing up for development of the next 2 years, so development of the 2019-21 budget. And Director Melcher indicated we're getting very close to an RFP for a new licensing system. And I just kind of want to put out there that we're expecting some budgetary changes due to that system. In fact, we're pursuing a number of business process changes in the licensing realm that will affect our budget quite significantly. And that's an expectation of a pretty significant margin of savings. So with that, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that you have about the financial report or where we are at in the budget development process.
Commissioners, any questions? Okay, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you, Erica. We'll move that on then to the next step here in the day's agenda, which would be adoption of temporary rules. You have 10 temporary rules before you on the TAN agenda. that require your ratification here today. And of course, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on those.
Okay, Commissioner, you've all had a chance to look them over. Any questions? Comments? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Chair Finley, I would move that we adopt the temporary orders set forth on the TAN agenda number 1 through 10.
I second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Weber, seconded by Commissioner Aikenson. All in favor by say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously by the 6 commissioners present.
Thank you, Chair Finley and Commissioners. Then that takes us to the public forum. We do have, I guess, 4 individuals signed up under public forum today, and the first up would be Mr. Steve Fick. 3 minutes?
Yeah. Morning, Steve.
Thank you, Director. For the record, my name is Steve Fick, PO 715, Astoria, Oregon. I don't know, did staff bring up a copy of some tables for you? They're there? Okay. What I'm here today is concern over the Gillnet management plan that's been enacted. I thought we should probably make you aware of some of the concerns we have. If you have those tables in front of you, it's pretty self-explanatory. It shows that we had 0 harvest in the main stem of the Columbia for spring salmon, 0 for summer. We expect 0 opportunity in the late fall coho fishery, either by a gill net or tangle net. And then in the fall Chinook landings, you'll see what the harvests have been for August and September, and what was expected was around 44,000 fish, and we're going to be significantly under that. The table also shows you a 5-year average. The coho, I might add, in the fall, if you did a 5 or a 10-year average, that would be very similar. My understanding was, we don't have an average for it, but it ran about the average of 5 or 10. So our expectations were that we were going to be no less than a 5% economic damage done to us, proportional to current fish values, proportional to where we would have been before that. So I'm here today. I drove for my 4 minutes because I feel it's very important for our community that we, and for our industry, that we offer our assistance on how we can tweak this plan, make it a little more palatable for everybody and meet the objectives, because we're simply not meeting the objectives. Another example would be, I recall you clearly said we would have no less than a 30% tule impact for the fall operations of our fishery. Those numbers won't be out till February, but we've talked to staff. Our own calculations say it's probably going to be about 15%. And some would say, well, we have steelhead constraints on that, but the fact is that my understanding was we were going to do whatever we could to utilize those 30% of the tules, and we had intensive monitoring on our steelhead fishery for the bee run. Summer steelhead, I believe we had less than 2 mortalities. Don't quote me on that, but it was around 2 for 20% of the fleet being monitored through the season. So it's again, we're demonstrating we're very selective in our harvest tools to maximize harvest on healthy stocks, targeted stocks, and minimize impacts on those others. The other point I'd like to make too is that we have, other issues with these select areas. They're not performing as we had hoped. And then having conversations with nymphs and others, some of the fish that would have economic viability, such as the rogue stock that is in Young's Bay, their plan is to eventually remove those from that fishery. And the only other stock that's palatable that time of year is a tule, Lower River tule hatchery stock, which is essentially has no value. So that's a problem. So I'd really offer our industry's hands out here to help you guys craft something that would be meaningful, meet the objectives of both the recreational and the commercial fishery. I've got some great ideas. I know we have to negotiate with Washington, and I don't think we did a very good job last time. The staff could have done some things. We got 0 summer fish that we all had worked to recover those runs after 50 years, as an example. But I offer my assistance in negotiating it forward with Washington. I think we can do much better.
Good.
And work for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Commissioners. Commissioner Aikenson.
Thank you for that summary, and I think it's important for us to see how things are working now with the Columbia River fishery, and we've certainly had problems with the increased temperatures on the river. Can you give us a general idea of what types of ideas you have that maybe would help to resolve some of these issues that you're facing with the commercial fishery?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we need to do is review where we were prior to the plan. So where would we be meeting the objectives if we just simply would have been in a cooperative management plan that we had been with the North of Falcon process? And I bet you're going to find out that you're going to be within 95% of meeting the recreational objectives, and you'll be within 95% of ours if we went back to that type of working together plan. That's one example. We need a clear understanding that every year is different too. We need flexibility. We have situations here where you're going to see where your summer Chinook fisheries, you met all the objectives of everybody except for the consumer. There is surplus fish that went unharvested that could have gone harvested in some fishery that was our share. And that's the summer fisheries one. The recreational fishery didn't use all of their spring impacts, which we didn't get an opportunity that those should have been rolled over into the consumer fishery, I believe, as an example. We can't even run, as tight as we are at 20% impact, we can't even run the select area fisheries right now with those, the way it's. We need more impacts. I think if you modeled a matrix plan out with every run is different every year, if we would have had another 15% impacts, I don't think you wouldn't have lost any time for the recreational fishery this year on the main stem. And most years, you may lose a day. And at the same time, you would be providing the most highly valued Chinook salmon in the world to your constituents in the month of March, when the select areas don't have meaningful numbers of fish in there. So you'd provide fish for the public, you wouldn't impact the recreational fishery significantly, and they still have the Willamette, the Cowlitz, the Sandy, some of these tributaries to fish in. On that one day, they may lose on one given year. So those are examples. We're leaving fish unharvested in the summer, in the spring, and we definitely are in the fall. And I think we had conflicting goals here. We want to get more harvestable fish out of the river, and at the same time, this plan was going to create more economics for the recreational fishery. And I think as we start reviewing this, I think we need to make definite changes to it to provide for everybody, because we simply don't have. We've been squeezed into such a box now, it's impossible to operate really in an economically viable fishery.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Buckmaster.
Steve, thanks for making the drive. If I remember correctly, some of the basic tenets that were going to make this plan work were a massive increase of coho coho raised in the select areas, moving them down from mid-river, primarily Washington, and coming down. Another one was that we were going to see either an increase or additional select areas. That was a way to reduce economic damage caused by a loss of main stem fisheries. And one that our staff talked about a great deal was making sure we get a fair share, and I believe it was a minimum of 30% of what was called, I think Ed's term was the money fish, the fall lower river hatchery and upriver bright fisheries. So those are the three big, and seines, and that we were going to come up with a method of harvesting on the main stem that was somehow more selective than the selective use of gill nets. So those are the four, I think, big things that we're going to make this plan work. How are we doing on those four?
Well, Commissioner Buckmaster, not very well, unfortunately. A lot of the, to bring this back a little bit of frustration in my part is 25 years ago, I asked to review additional select area fisheries that potentially could work in the Columbia River, and we did some of that work. And I don't know where that went. Director Melcher and I, for 3 years, I begged him to let us try a seine 20 years ago. We found that it didn't work. I have personally been looking for alternatives wherever we can when we can't access them with our existing tools. So a lot of that work had been done. We reviewed a lot of that. The river has not changed geographically, so the answer is the same as it was 25 years ago. We're pretty well where we're at for select areas under the current opportunities we have, either through area or legal requirements from the federal government. So that's one thing that we can put a finite amount of fish into these areas too. There's a tendency to think that we can just keep throwing more fish into one area and we'll have more. Where you put so much corn seed in a field, and after so much cornfield, it doesn't grow in the field. It doesn't grow. It's the same theory. So we have that challenge. The other thing is too, we have healthy stocks that we can harvest under the federal and state ESA requirements in the main stem, and still have very viable recreational fisheries and other uses of those resources. So we have had a significant economic loss. I think we're going to be about 1/3 of the harvest this year that we had expected and were told we would have on that fishery. These are all preliminary numbers I'm giving you, but it hasn't worked. Parts of it can, and that's what I'm here. We'll continue to work forward to what does work. I might add, Chair, too, we talk about these summer fish. I'm on a NOAA task force right now, and we're supposed to save the river, I guess. Extremely challenging, and I had done some work with the Colvilles about 10 years ago. I helped them collect broodstock, design nets, and told them where they could go to get broodstock for the new $25 million hatchery that went in up there at Chief Joe. Well, that became a $65 million hatchery. And as soon as they came online, the PUDs that were required to create fish for up there reduced the number that they were producing, because there was just a given amount of hatchery fish that they were going to allow to be harvested or produced in that upper region. So the net result was nothing. And these are that's just a side note frustration that so it's it's an example of how we're not spending our resources, I think, effectively.
Okay, any questions? Anything else, commissioners? You're aware of the pound net that was used this summer?
Yes.
What's your opinion on the effectiveness of pound nets, where they would fit with the physiography of the river?
Chair Finley, the one problem we have there is that here again, we got a whole new set of rules that we didn't have 50 or 100 years ago. Just driving a piling, I have a couple thousand piling under my plant, and you know, I always call it an act of Congress to get a piling driven. They're expensive. They're $2,000 to $3,000 a piece, and that's another factor. The economics, if you roll out the economics and what it actually does for harvest and for protecting resources, I don't think it's going to price out very well. The one good thing about the existing fishery, and there's people that are willing to, I mean, these guys are willing, nobody talks about the $200 every time it costs somebody from Astoria to drive up for an opportunity to go fishing. Those are examples, the tangle net's example. I think it's better to work with the existing businesses, the small businesses. Economically, I think it's more valuable to the communities in the states if you spread the money around versus one guy's a millionaire and everybody else works for minimum wage. And so the economics, there's sometimes a pound net could work. There is one that was up there. There is some applications that it possibly could work, to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve.
Chair Finley, could I
Yes.
take 10 seconds more?
Sure.
There's another issue with the last 3 or 4 years, they made a requirement on licensing for gillnet permits that not only did you have to buy the licenses, it was about $75, but if you weren't going to be active in the fishery, you still had to buy the boat license. And now we're in a situation where we have third the economics we had at that point when you made that decision, and you're asking people either spend another $400 on boat licenses for the gillnet and the gillnet license, even though you're not going to use it, or you lose it. And I would ask that the commission would look at that. That's a lot of money for a lot of these people that, with the hope of they may be able to use their permit again. So, and I don't think it's going to change your budget if you make that change. You want to comment on that? All right, we'll look into it, Steve. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
I just wanted to ask Kurt if we would have an update, like in the spring, about how things did work out this year in our first year past the Columbia River reform rules.
Chair Finley and Commissioner Higginson, certainly I think by the spring we will have the final results, if you will, of the 2017 fisheries, and so bringing that forward not as a full agenda item but under a director's report would be certainly something we're interested in doing.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Holly. Okay, Director.
Very good. Mr. Chair, then we have Mr. Jim Coleman and Mr. Jeff Pobolite that wanted to come and talk with you about Columbia River B steelhead.
Can you start?
Good
morning.
gentlemen.
Chair Finley, Director Melcher, Commissioners. My name is Jim Coleman. I am a Columbia River commercial advisor and a 16-year user of the Columbia River fisheries. I am here today to talk to you about the wild bee run steelhead. This year we have been managing the fall fishery with an estimated 1,000 native bee steelhead returning to the Columbia River system. A very alarming number, we have to admit. At the beginning of the year, the model summary showed a 2% non-Indian handle of the bee run fish, the bee run native fish. This worked out to be about 22 fish could be handled between the commercial and the sport fishery. The native fishery was managed on a 13% impact. More on that later. The non-Indian commercial fishery was shut down when it was determined they had 2.7 to 4.8 mortality, catching only 18,984 Chinook salmon of their 45,000 preseason allotment. They also handled 226 non-bee run steelhead in their fishery. The sport fishery is still fishing, having caught over 50,000 Chinooks, handling 626 steelhead, with the steelhead fishery reopening below Bonneville Dam on September 1st, with 250 being caught and 133 being released. That's a select fishery. They have to throw the wilds back. I could not get a breakdown on how many of these were bees in the sport fishery, but they continue to fish unmonitored. In the native fishery, as of September 25th, and I didn't get the next fact sheet after that one, they have caught 111,670 Chinook salmon with a total of 10,457 steelhead. Those aren't released, those go in a tote, of which 648 were bees. Of those bees, 112 were wild. Wild bee salmon, 112. That is 10% of that 1,000 fish we expected back. Went to restaurants. So my point is, where is the conservation in these numbers? I see it in one user group. They were monitored and shut down in their fishery, leaving 25,000 fish on the table. When this came to my attention, I've been asking questions for about 3 weeks, kind of being a pest, calling everybody I could talk to about this issue of why. These numbers seem skewed to me, these numbers seem out of whack to me, and mostly all I got out of my questions were leaving me with more questions, unanswered questions. So I bring this to your attention today just for information. That what do we do with this? What do we do with these numbers? Jeff's going to talk some more about the issue. I see the red button flashing, but we've already lost the June hog to this system. This bee-run steelhead, the wild bee-run steelhead, is a steelhead that gets to 30 pounds. It's a one-of-a-kind fish that only swims the Columbia River, and to me, it appears we are attempting to lose that fish by our harvest methods and lack of monitoring of certain fisheries. So, thank you. Any questions?
I'm going to do Jeff first. Okay. Then we'll question both of you or one of you. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, yeah, I'm on the steelhead thing too, because we just, the gillnet fishery got shut down. I was a little bit surprised, but it was just kind of shock, really. And you look at the native fisheries that occur upriver, and they're all kind of that fishery is a directed steelhead fishery. They use set nets. There's hundreds of set nets. Steelhead run right on the beach. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but if you fish in the river, steelhead are hard on the beach. And so they have a directed fishery, as he said, and there's the statistics on an endangered species. And it's just, from our aspect as a commercial fisherman and deploying a gear type on an endangered species that's now, I think they updated that run to 800, and they caught over 100 of that 800. It's not sustainable. I know that probably the native fishery is taboo, or you can't address what they're doing, but that's the big. The other issue is the lower river sport fishery has essentially no steelhead monitoring. There's, we were intensely monitored on this one, and there's a lot of that lower river sport fishery is beach fishermen. They don't end up in creel surveys, and I think that's that the commercials are taking the brunt of this, and the natives and the sport fishermen are not doing their part. But at the moment, I'm doing research seining for the state of Washington in Zone 5, and this I seined 2 days this week, and we really didn't catch any steelhead. There was some earlier, but now there's like no steelhead, and there's still no opening. So I was a little, sitting out there on a daily basis, wondering what's happening. So, questions?
Mr. Buckmaster.
So your last comment made me think. So you saw steelhead in your seining
Earlier.
You're saying that seining is a good indicator of whether or not the
Yeah,
steelhead.
I'm
are
actually
passing.
seining right on the shore.
Yeah.
Because I'm up in Zone 5 where it's deep, and we have a kind of a shallow seine. So the only way we can catch anything is get right on the beach. So if there's any steelhead around, we're going to catch them.
So you're talking about run timing. You're saying that the steelhead are passed.
They're gone.
Okay, I just want everybody to be aware. I thought that's what you were saying, everybody to be aware. You're saying they're gone. Why aren't we looking at getting some of the coho and maybe a few of the Chinook left?
Right now.
This is the whole issue of steelhead has been of concern to a number of, we've talked about it on the commission last time. We talked about the warm water and the effects of catch and hook and release, staying with the traditional 10% on when we have warm water approaching 75 degrees. Although I got a little bit of heat in my hometown about the Observer program, I basically supported it, saying let's get the answers on the gillnet fleet, and I think we got the answers. We spent $157,000 to get some answers, and it is as clean a fishery as we have, but we're not. I agree with you that we do not have answers on the hook and release impact of our sport fishery on steelhead generally and specifically in the warm water. We have been told by our staff that we will be getting, we'll be able to talk about it, we'll be briefed on that, there'll be discussions. We know there is a workshop on cold water refugia coming up in Portland that the EPA is doing on November 9th. So it doesn't seem fair to the steelhead, and I appreciate the fact you guys are here talking about the steelhead.
We were shut down because of steelhead, so it's,
It is steelhead.
I had an interesting thing happen this week. We started this, we couldn't start seining until the middle of September because of water temperature. And then once we did start, we had the first time we had a difficult time keeping them alive. We didn't have oxygen, so then the next day we got oxygen, oxygen bottle and these bubblers in the tank, and this was just under 70 degrees. 70 degrees is the threshold. And this week we went out there and they've got oxygen monitors in my tank, but the boat's tank is full of water, and we put the fish in there, and we didn't have to use oxygen. The temperature went down 10 degrees, and there's so much more oxygen in colder water that the fish aren't stressed. It was really quite surprising. So as you sport fish earlier in the year in those warmer temperatures, those fish are much more susceptible to stress in a warmer temp and colder temp. It was really quite surprising to all of us, even the biologists.
My understanding was this year, part of your testing was that you took Chinook and put them in a live.
Basically, it was all species. There's coho too.
So in order to get the information, I'm assuming that you did it as well with steelhead.
No, we released all the steelhead. I mean,
So the opportunity-
immediate release on steelhead.
So the opportunity we had to look at long-term effects on steelhead, we didn't use it?
No,
Why?
I'm not sure. But it was immediate release for steelhead. I mean, they measured them, you know, and did a quick scan on them and then released them.
I'll take an attempt at the answer. When the original mortality numbers came out from the first mortality study, there were people that liked the numbers that came on the steelhead. Those were doable numbers. The numbers on the Chinook were unlike numbers, so they screamed bloody murder that we got to have more studies done. But so they liked this number and said, let's just leave that steelhead number alone. Well, let's go get more data and study the Chinook and the coho mortality more. So those numbers are going to come now, and higher, lower, whatever they turn out to be, will probably change the Chinook mortality numbers. But the idea is that the Chinook, the steelhead numbers are fine. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Mortality rates differ widely with temperature.
That's all the research that had been delivered to us by other groups coming in after our commission meeting. We were sent things by fish conservation organizations that said that, and you're confirming it as far as what you're seeing. Thanks, guys.
I'm just, another question, and I don't know where we get the share allocations are implemented and how they are come up with, but it seems like to me, if you're going to have a native fishery and a sport fishery and it's a 50-50 split, natives get 50, we split the other 50, 20 down here, that the steelhead impacts would be a 50-50 deal. But the numbers are 2% versus 13%. And I know that's fighting City Hall here, but maybe somebody at your level can raise a voice a little louder than mine. That's because a couple percent to go towards that commercial fishery will make that commercial fishery a viable operating fishery that can continue.
4 more fish would have.
It's
Okay. We'll look into that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, fellows, for taking the time to come.
Mr. Chair, then last under public forum, we have Steve Janego, if I pronounced that correctly. But
Welcome,
Yeah,
Steve.
good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with the commission this morning. My objective is to ask for a enhancement to
State
our...
your name and address, please, for the record.
I'm sorry, sure
And
will.
then we'll go.
Steve Janego, Sisters, Oregon.
Okay.
And I really appreciate the time this morning. Wanted to just float an idea by the commission that came to me this summer, pushing a lawnmower in the backyard at about 95-degree heat and in smoky Sisters, and it dawned on me that my 20 Heart Mountain pronghorn preference points, if I die today, will be gone. And it got me thinking about our son and my daughter and a legacy that I could leave them. And so I began to take a look at our preference point system, looked at other states, trying to understand, how we're accommodating pass it on kind of a strategy. Realize, that we'd have to be very careful about people making sure that we're not having any fraud in the point system itself. But this seems like a pretty straightforward proposal, which is to basically make a provision to allow a points holder to have an insurance policy in the event of death and to be able to pass on big game preference points to your immediate family. And the overall objective there feels like it feeds right into our hunting heritage here in Oregon, where you continue to pass it down to future generations, so your children and grandchildren, they have the opportunity to enjoy the kind of hunting that we've all enjoyed here in Oregon. And then at the same time, it keeps the more senior hunters kind of in the game, because you're buying a license every year, you're buying a tag, you're collecting preference points, and in the event of death, which we don't like to think about, it does happen, and to just have a provision that kind of keeps pace, with the next generation hunters, to allow those points to really be valued, is really, I think, the core of this proposal.
We have your write-up.
Yeah.
Each individual commissioner. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Buckmaster.
I have just one comment. Thank you. That was a well-written, well-reasoned argument that was presented, and I, for one, enjoyed reading it, and I thought about the issues. I thought about what's the downside. If I've got 18 points, and all of a sudden somebody has inherited 20, and they go, where is the equitability of the issue? Where's the fairness? I think it's something particularly that you illustrated that other states have looked at. I was unaware whether that is something our staff has looked at and would like staff to address it. But as far as testimony and how it was presented, I found it very informative and helpful to the process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anyone else? All right. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the director's report, and we're on to Exhibit A.
Exhibit A, approval of the minutes that were emailed to us by Michelle. So, September 15th commission meeting in Welches, Oregon. Any serious omissions or mistakes made other than typo or minor editing that way? Okay, then I'll take a motion.
Chairman Finley, I would move that we approve the minutes of the September 15th, 2017 ODFW Commission meeting.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Weber and seconded by Commissioner Woolley that we approve the minutes of the September 15th, 2017 Commission meeting. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously by the commissioners present. All right. Exhibit B, adoption of administratively set fees. Erica. This is the proposal that makes you popular in the world.
Chair Finley, members of the committee, for the record, again, my name is Erica Kleiner. So I'd like to turn your attention to Exhibit B. The non-statutory fee schedule is on that exhibit. So just a little bit of background. Back in June of 2050, the legislature put in place a fee adjustment package that became Senate Bill 247, and that was enacted into law. That put a majority of the department's fees into statute. So leading up to that fee adjustment, an internal review was conducted at the department to reassess the cost of administering various licenses and permits. And the results of that review became the proposed fee amounts. So those were the statutorily set fees, And what you're considering today is the administrative role fees. These are mostly fees that are occupational in nature, but some are recreational and some are commercial. So Oregon Revised Statute 496146 grants you the authority up to $250 to prescribe in rule fees for licenses, tags, permits, and applications. So this strategy associated with the overall fee increase, this is an incremental approach. Back in 2015, the then Deputy Director Bill Herber presented to you the full fee package, and at that time a commitment was made to come back and re-engage you on this subject. So we're here in 2017 to do that. These administrative fee increases help further advance the department's budget into a sustainable path for the future. And the fee amounts reflect the costs of the daily operations of the department plus inflation for these costs. And then two final points. The public was involved in this process, this fee development process, both in the external budget advisory committee groups as well as other public meetings. And then in your materials, you'll also have the last 2 years of all of the public correspondence received that relates to this topic. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you have about the fees that you're considering today.
Okay. Commissioners, we have no public testimony. So if you have any thoughts, I know we all reviewed the various columns. It was well presented. Thank you that we could see the proposed adjustments very clearly and easily. So if there are no questions or comments, Commissioner Atkinson.
I just had one comment, and that is that I am kind of frustrated that our fees are higher than some other states, and I'd really like to see if the legislature or the governor can help us with providing additional funding to ODFW to help us with this issue. Other states have better support from general fund funding, and we use our license dollars for so many different things that benefit all the citizens of Oregon. And I do have some frustration about our fees being at the level they're at because we're not adequately funded for all of the things that ODFW is by law required to do. So just a comment about frustration on that.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? There are no more comments or questions. I'll entertain a motion.
I want to point one thing out real quick, which is there's a correction on Exhibit B on the addendum, which you have in front of you, and so when you make the motion, to be sure to include the as proposed by staff and on the addendum in Exhibit B, addendum 2, I guess, Exhibit B.
No. Several versions. Please refer to this chart. Okay. Exhibit B. Bob, do you want to do this one? Here's the
I would move to amend chapters 635, divisions 001, 007, 043, 044, 046, 047, 049, 050, 055, 075, 200, and 435 relating to increasing administratively set licenses and fees as proposed by staff and as set out in the addendum to Exhibit B.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Weber, seconded by Commissioner Atkinson. Commissioners, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously by the 6 commissioners present. Okay. Thank you very much, Erica.
Thank you.
Take that off. Yeah. Okay. Exhibit C. Mr. Derek Broman. All of those things. Derek, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Chair Finley, members of the Commission, Director Melcher, for the record, I am Derek Broman. I am the ODFW Carnivore Fur Bearer Coordinator. Today we're going to be talking about the update to the Oregon Cougar Management Plan. So in this very brief presentation, I'll discuss the review process that got us to this point, give you a brief overview of the plan and some of the more recent changes to the plan, and then just provide an overall summary. So this process, we're a good 2 years into this effort. It kicked off in Bandon in April 2016, where we had a presentation and also stakeholder panels provided testimony with a good Q&A with the commission at that time. We then came back in October of that year in La Grande, had a presentation and public testimony. Immediately after that meeting, we got into the weeds on updating the plan. The first draft of the plan was presented for the August commission meeting here in Salem. And since that time, we've made the updates, and here we are here today in October. Throughout that entire period, we were always engaged in different discussions with stakeholder groups, tribal members, and anybody in the public that had curiosities and questions. I also attended the Mountain Lion workshop in Colorado this May, which was a very valuable experience to try to see what are the hot topics in the cougar world right now, and see if there's anything that the plan is missing or needs to better highlight. That was a very valuable experience. So the draft that we rolled out in August, and these chapters are still the same as they are in the draft that you have today. We condensed the 2006 plan as much as possible to try to make it more concise, try to focus on retaining Oregon-specific information. As much as I tried to reduce the size of this plan, I think it actually grew. So, shucks. But the main structure of the plan, main components, main information lie in chapters 2 through 4. In chapter 2 is where we have a great deal of information on cougar ecology, behavior, natural history. This is where a significant amount of data is presented. We went over these sections a little bit more in detail in August, and I can certainly answer questions regarding any of these topics after we hear testimony. But a couple of these sections are brand new, and I'm very proud to say that almost all of these sections contain Oregon-based information. We've been at the cougar research game for 30 plus years now, and so there's a great deal of information that we're using to make our decisions, and so I was very happy to be able to update the plan and continue to point out and highlight these things. Chapter 3 contained the cougar management objectives, and the objectives did not change drastically between the 2006 plan and this 2017 update. The objectives still focus on ensuring healthy populations, addressing conflict, and managing cougars in concert with other game mammals, all the while focusing on the use of adaptive management. And we have 4 objectives in this plan, 2 of which remain mostly unchanged. The first objective is to have a population of cougars that does not fall below 3,000 animals. That number is there as essentially a biological safety net. This is not a goal, this is not a target population. Previously, the commission directed staff to have that be the maximum population for cougars, but that was many years ago, and since the population has doubled in that time with that safety net in place. That 3,000 number is for all age classes. There's oftentimes a bit of confusion when we're saying numbers of cougars. What do we mean? Do we mean adults? Do we mean all age classes? And all the numbers I'm presenting today are specific to all age classes. So that 3,000 number is used to help set the zone mortality caps or quotas. So without that safety net, we wouldn't have any way to identify what should be the maximum mortalities in each of our zones. The action items in this objective help us focus on continued monitoring of populations, trying to recognize if we're seeing any decline or any concerns in populations, requires continued mandatory check-ins, and also helps steer and guide future research efforts. We did hear from some stakeholders that they are interested in if we could identify a maximum allowable population or get more specific on management objectives and more specific harvest objectives at smaller scales. While in certain parts of the state we think that we're nearing carrying capacity for cougars, as wolves continue to spread throughout the state, cougars will likely no longer be the big man on campus. And so an effort to estimate what is the maximum cougar population in any area might be quite difficult, considering things could change pretty drastically as wolves start to show up. So we are hesitant to satisfy that request. So if this objective is still the primary focus is identifying that biological safety net. Objective 2 through 4 are all contingent upon Objective 1 being met, so to ensure that we have resilient, robust populations. Objective 2 is specific to addressing human safety and pet safety and conflicts. The objective is focused on trying to do what is necessary to be proactive, and proactive meaning trying to implement preventative measures, trying to focus on education and informing the public so that way they can take steps and actions to prevent these conflicts from ever even occurring. There's an emphasis on the use of non-lethals as an important tool, and also exploring new options. There's a lot of new tools and techniques that are being explored right now, and always having an ear out for those types of things and applying them are identified in this objective. And continued recording and monitoring of these activities. We have a wildlife damage database where all of these complaints are recorded. And then the one minor change, or well, I don't know if we call it minor or not, but one change from the 2006 plan to the 2017 update regarding the thresholds for conflict and how to measure that. In the 2006 plan, there were static values that were identified as thresholds, and if those thresholds were exceeded, you could consider removing cougars or addressing that issue under a target area management tool. We are proposing a technique that is more dynamic. We presented this in August. It's if the 3-year average were to exceed the previous 10-year average, then you may need to consider additional management or consider all your available tools at that time. We got a lot of feedback on that technique. We heard some direction from stakeholders and commission that they wanted to see if there were more biological basis for this tool, or try to see if you could see something that was statistically significant. So we chewed on that following the August meeting, and while there could be some other metrics used, we felt that the proposed one is certainly something that the public and staff can comprehend. 3-year mean exceeding a 10-year mean, most people know how to calculate that. If we went into the statistical significance, that would require an incredibly complicated bit of statistics. You're dealing with time series data. That would be incredibly complicated. Most of the public would be unable to track that or calculate that themselves. And because this is a social issue, not so much a biological issue, this is trying to measure if there's something that's occurring outside of the norm. We feel comfortable with this metric, but certainly we're up for discussion on ideas of how to address this topic. Objective 3, again, if Objective 1 is met, it calls for the agency to address cougar livestock conflicts, and there's a lot of overlap between this objective and Objective 2. Again, focusing on addressing the conflict, proactively meaning that trying to educate livestock producers. We've already had discussions with Farm Bureau on potential ways to educate livestock producers on techniques to resolve conflict and damage, especially if we're having cougars venture into areas that they have not historically resided. There's going to be a lot of producers that don't know how to deal with cougars, yet there's some producers that have been dealing with them for 30, 40 years that might have quite a bit of information to share with their peers. So that's one focus that is a product of this objective. Objective 4 calls for the agency to manage cougars in concert with other game species. This focuses on making sure that we are understanding and identifying the relationship between cougars and their prey. So continued focus on that front. This objective recommends increased cougar take when necessary and when we can identify where cougars may be a significant limiting factor to ungulate populations. And as always, the emphasis is on hunting as a primary tool. We have that in statute as a requirement, but also this is the agency we would like to provide that opportunity for that to be the management tool used in place. Chapter 4 received probably the greatest deal of attention and updates since August. This objective focuses on adaptive management for cougar management. In it, we updated the hypotheses that were first posed in the 2006 plan. Those 4 hypotheses were specific to ideas that take would reduce conflict, would improve ungulate populations, reduce livestock conflict, and it would also, we could confirm that cougar populations were resilient on the landscape. This chapter also focused on the different management scales and associated objectives. We heard that there was a request for more emphasis on the fine scale management, like a 4th scale where it's an individual basis, not larger areas, but how do we address these individual situations? And that was a request we heard in August and addressed in the update. We also go into detail on the target area management tool. And again, this was a section that received a lot of attention throughout the whole process, but received a lot more background information from August till now. Some of the things that were addressed in there were acknowledging that this topic and this tool is of great interest to the public, to the stakeholders, to the commission, to staff. There was concerns about the frequency of this use. Perhaps it was being overused, and so we provided some numbers in this current update to show that based on the 2006 thresholds, 76 times did a threshold for conflict be exceeded, yet there was only 3 target areas for those 76 times in which the criteria were met. In Eastern Oregon, there were 37 times in which the elk criteria were met to where you could consider a target area, yet only 3 target areas were implemented for elk. And in Eastern Oregon, 233 times the deer criteria were met, yet there's only been 5 cougar target areas to address deer. Also, this is where we've presented the ideas on better design for target areas and considerations for them moving forward. So this was a real attempt to try to bring everybody up to speed, try to fill in those gaps, and try to address any assumptions that we had coming into August. And then also we have our zone updates in this chapter as well to provide an overview of the 6 different cougar zones throughout the state. Chapter 5 contains the literature cited section. We've added over 100 new citations to the plan. And then finally we have our appendices. And I don't have all of them up here, but the first 2 were brand new to the plan, where we had a habitat analysis and also an overview of our past target areas and expenses. This too received a great deal of update. In August, we were requested by the commission to provide more information on what's happened since the past target areas were implemented. So we updated that information. You can see that in those appendices. And then we are adopting 4 appendices, the captive kitten guidelines, incident response guidelines, the glossary, and target area development process. So this draft plan was sent out for external review, which is required by rule. It was sent out to 22 experts in Western United States. The names of those individuals are listed in your packet. We heard back from 6 individuals. We got comments from 3 individuals. Those 3 individuals that responded provided some great comments. They actually I was very happy to hear some of their comments and happy that they chimed in because they've got quite a body of work for each of them. A number of the questions were specific to their area of research or their jurisdiction. Rich Beausoleil from Washington asked just a lot of questions that we would have in any conversation about comparing cougar management between the different states. We got a lot of support for the use of scale-specific and adaptive management techniques. There was a lot of great open-ended questions posed, and for the most part, none of the questions caught us off guard. I had an answer to all those questions, and many of their questions are the same questions we have. We don't yet have an answer for some of them, but it's good that those external peers were thinking along the same lines, which was really nice feedback. We made minor edits based on that feedback, but really there's no major changes that were made to that August draft that you have now. So in overall, this whole process, we added a significant amount of information to the plan. We tried to reduce it where necessary to try to make it more condensed and streamlined. This plan has many, many different pieces in it that comment on the status of our populations, whether they're trending upward or downwards, whether that's based on kitten survival, whether that's based on indices, on adult females in the harvest rates. That chapter 2, most of those sections give an indication of where we think populations are headed around the state. This plan really tries to focus on coexistence and trying to address conflict as that seems to be a growing issue with cougar management. And this draft update contains a lot of information on target areas, which were a hot topic this entire period. So trying to satisfy everybody's requests and try to inform them of the decision making, where staff are critical on the topic, where we've seen success, and where we're looking to change things. These objectives of this plan we feel really help drive where we're taking things into the future. We don't expect any major changes in cougar management moving forward. However, some of the big topics that we see we're facing right now and will be continuing to face in the future are expanded populations into northwestern Oregon, up the coast. We're seeing more cougars show up in the Willamette Valley. So how are we going to address more of these cougar-human interactions? Somewhat related to that, it's important to try and incorporate human dimensions, try to get the public's input and opinion on these things to help better direct management. Also, this is something that staff had an interest in, but we also heard from some of our stakeholders a desire to continue to do density estimates, collect information from all corners of the state, try to do some sort of research and hands-on monitoring in every one of our zones, or at least some of our major habitat types, so that way we can extrapolate that information across those similar habitats. And also identify refugia. One of the major points of interest in cougar management in really North America is identifying sources and sinks following a metapopulation structure, where if you have areas where you have higher take, ensuring that there's cougars from other areas that can fill that void, and confirming that there's connectivity, etc. Always considering additional population models and monitoring tools, and then also similarly trying to see if we can't measure and monitor response to wolves expanding across the state. So I could take any questions now, otherwise I'll chat with you after we get testimony.
Okay. Commissioners, we have 15 people signed up for public testimony, so we'll call you back. Derek, thank you very much. Commissioners, it's still early, so I'm going to start calling up witnesses. If you need to take a break, just take them individually, and we'll just pursue this. Okay. So I'm going to call you up in groups of 3. We have 3 chairs and 3 microphones. Jim Akinson, Jim Ham, and Al LePage. And I see that you have all legibly written your name and address. Thank you. So you won't have to state your address for the record, just your name. Jim, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair Finley, Director Melcher, Commissioners, Aaron, Michelle. Appreciate the opportunity to address you all on this topic of the Cougar Plan. I'm representing Oregon Hunters Association. I'm the Conservation Director. We have approximately 10,000 members in Oregon. And I don't think I'm going to just read my testimony. You've all seen that. Basically, what it boils down to is our organization, our board of directors, fully endorse this plan the way it's written. It's very scientific in nature, extremely thorough. We really appreciate the fact that it pulls in so much Oregon-related research, of which I participated in 30 years ago. And it's a great body of work, just bottom line. So we really sincerely hope that you all will endorse this plan today. When I first started doing work on cougars in Oregon, there was an estimated population of 3,000. I was doing research for ODFW in the time that the ban on forms of hunting was passed, banning hound hunting, and we had great concerns about the capability to manage this species. And actually, in looking back those 25 years, things have worked out better than we guessed that they would have. And I think a lot of it's a credit to our department and their capability to be adaptive. And really, the way I see it, the bottom line in this plan is its adaptive management capacity. It's very strong in that arena, and it considers all the elements of our social situation in our state. Plus, it also governs the ecological consideration and concerns through that population threshold, of minimum threshold of a number of 3,000 statewide. There's things that are somewhat controversial, i.e. the target areas. I think that Derek Broman and his staff, he's consulted, have done an outstanding job of figuring out how to connect science to that. And Derek mentioned the mountain lion workshop that he attended in Colorado. This is one of the few that I've missed in the last 3 decades. But something he didn't mention that's of important note is that Oregon will be hosting the next one of these. And I think one of the big reasons is because of the way we've dealt with managing this species in this state. So I think we really need to be proud of our department staff and our heritage in managing cougars in Oregon. That's all I have.
Must have practiced. You're within 8 seconds of your 3 minutes.
Just getting experience.
Okay. Jim.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I thank you for the time and opportunity to address you today. And just a little background, the first time I testified was in 1972 or 73 when we took the cougar off and bear off the predator list and made big game animals. I haven't been at a commission hearing for over 25 years, but I attended a lot of them. Some of the recommendations to the commission are still in statute. One of them is caliber designation for hunting with both rifle and pistol that the commission adopted that I proposed. Lots of other things, but what I'm here mainly today for is the interaction between people and cougar. Now, I don't know how it keeps getting swept under the table, but there has been a documented cougar attack on a person in the state of Oregon. In 1973, October 16th, at Cheshire, Oregon, Randy Brewer, I think he was 10 years old, was attacked by a cougar as he and his brother were waiting to get on the school bus. Now, the person who killed that cougar was a gentleman named Stan Thomas. He was a local houndman. The Oregon State Police person that was involved in that was Dennis Violet. He was a game warden. That, for some reason, I don't know why, the state keeps saying that no one has ever been attacked. And yet there's a document that should be in your file somewhere that a biologist named Bill Castillo out of Springfield, Oregon, wrote, according to, let me see here, cougar conflict challenges in Lane County. Back in like 2001, I believe that article was written by him. And I would just like to go on record to state that this happened. It should be in your paperwork somewhere, in your files past. And why it isn't brought up, and it always says, I talked to Michelle Dennehy, it's about 3 months ago about this, after I heard it on the news again that no one had ever been attacked, no documented case. And still, I keep hearing the same thing. So I'm just here today to bring that to your attention, to put it on the record. The gentleman who killed the cougar retired from Oregon, or excuse me, from the Federal Animal Damage Control as a supervisor. He still is in Fossil, Oregon. Dennis Violet, I don't know if he's still alive or not. He retired from OSP. But there's a lot of people still around that could give you the information if you can't find it in your own records. That's all I'm here for today, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. All right, Al.
Al DePage, Bachelor of Science Biology, Master's in Science Education, and a full member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. My focus today is how economic science and democracy applies both to your mandate as a commission and to the Cougar Management Plan. Wildlife conservation is not only vital to a healthy ecosystem, but also to a healthy economy. When one considers the economic study done for ODFW, it clearly shows the significant impact that wildlife recreation has on the Oregon economy statewide. When one looks at the numbers, at the revenue generated and from specific wildlife recreation activities, the research also clearly shows that overall wildlife viewing tops the list, both in terms of how many people are involved and the amount of money generated. Fishing and hunting, of course, were also significant activities for the economy. Therefore, the economic benefits of wildlife recreation alone provide the rationale to act for conservation, and the Commission's mandate to act on behalf of everyone is found in statute, as the Commission shall provide for the productive and sustainable utilization of wildlife resources for all groups of users. Next, decisions to be made relative to the Cougar Management Plan need to be informed by science through observation and research. Predator control is one of the approaches taken by ODFW as part of their mule deer initiative. And in one past study, ODFW saw elk calf survival recruitment rates roughly double after cougar target areas were implemented in Heppner and Ukiah, and hope to repeat the success for mule deer in Warner and Steens Mountain. ODFW removed 28 cougars in Warner and 60 in Steens, but it concludes ODFW did not detect an increase in overall mule deer numbers in Warner and Steens. Therefore, ODFW's own field research in this specific study apparently suggests the removal of cougars in target zones essentially had little or no effect on deer numbers. The potential implications of this one study is that the target zone approach to hunt cougars to increase mule deer numbers may essentially be ineffective. Therefore, target zones as a conservation management strategy for cougars needs to be reconsidered and potentially removed from the updated Cougar Management Plan. ODFW's field research here is only one example relative to updating the plan. There's much more research and science to be considered, and wildlife conservation to be based upon science. Finally, in terms of democracy, it's clear on the results of 2 previous ballot measures that the people of Oregon have clearly voted against cougar hunting with hounds, and the fact is that it's against the law to do so. The rationale for this commission to act for democracy, again, is your mandate from statute. All members of the commission shall represent the public interest of the state. And the immediate opportunity to act in accordance with the democratic process of our state should be the removal of hound hunting of cougars from predator control or otherwise within the updated cougar management plan. In summary, the commission has the mandate, rationale, and immediate opportunity relative to updating the cougar management plan to serve the economy statewide through conservation, to develop wildlife management policy based on science, and to ensure democracy by upholding the laws passed by voters. I encourage your authentic deliberation, informed, thoughtful decisions, and actions in updating the cougar management plan. Thank you for this opportunity and your consideration in this regard.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Buckmaster.
Thank you all for your testimony. Mr. LePage, in your testimony, you make a pretty serious, in my opinion, a pretty serious statement about the law. And it's certainly something that we as commissioners all take seriously. So I have a question regarding your testimony, but addressed to Aaron or our director. Are we, as our current policy or policy as we're being asked to approve today, do we run the risk of doing anything illegal?
No, it's in ORS 498-164, which is the prohibition against using dogs to hunt cougars. There's a specific exception to that prohibition for agency and for agency employee and agents of the agency doing their management work. And so that is expressly allowed in statute as a management tool.
Thank you for the clarification, and thanks for your comments.
Okay. Commissioner Aikenson.
This is for Mr. LePage. I appreciate you bringing up the topic of economics, and I think we're all realizing that wildlife viewing is a significant economic benefit to the state of Oregon. But in the context of the cougar management plan, we're looking to maintain a viable, strong population of cougars in Oregon. Do you feel that this management plan somehow decreases the value of wildlife viewing regarding the numbers of cougars we're managing for in Oregon?
I have not reviewed the draft plan, so I probably cannot answer that question effectively.
Okay, because, you know, the intent of the plan, the intent of managing cougars in Oregon is to maintain, you know, a viable population, and I hope we are doing that. I believe that we are. So I'm a little concerned that's a concern of yours, that you know, wildlife viewing could somehow be adversely impacted by the number of cougars or the way that we manage cougars in Oregon.
Well, as I had mentioned in the letter actually that I wrote, which is a little bit longer than my testimony that I read, I basically made the point that in terms of wildlife viewing, of course, it would seem to make sense that the more animals, the better. Whether they're cougars, whether they're mule deer, whether they're rabbits, whether they're anything that involves wildlife. So that was my intent with that. And I wanted to highlight the fact, when you do look, what was surprising to me about the ODFW economic report was the numbers of people involved in wildlife viewing, as well as the amount of money generated by that one group. And so, once again, I was referencing your mandate to work for all users in the statute as a commission, and really just highlighting the fact that that's a group that also needs to be seriously considered in light of that economic study in terms of management. And once again, I think one of the lines in my letter was, the more animals, the better, just in general. Because people want to see animals, right? They're wildlife viewing, so the more the better. That was the basic intent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, panel. Thank you for the history, Mr. Ham. We'll look into that. Okay, next panel. Marv Sumner, Betty Patton, Zach Russell. And you have legibly listed your names and addresses, so just state your name for the record. And let's see, who's not here? Betty is here. That's what we. Zach. Sir, your name?
Mark.
Mark Sumner? Mark Sumner. Okay, and you're declining? Okay, thank you. And then we'll call up Mr. West, let's see, Betty, Zach, Wes York. Is Wes here? All right, we'll put him in on standby.
Time out.
Talk Rockstead, Scott Rockstead.
Scott Beckstead.
Beckstead, oh.
Scott.
He's here, I see him.
I see him.
I see him.
Hey, you teach at the university, you can't even write your name.
Seriously, Chair Finley? After all this time, you can't pronounce my name?
Well, that looks like an O.
He can't read it. It's not that he can't pronounce it.
All right. We'll start with you, Betty.
Okay. Thank you to Commissioner Chair Finley and Director Melcher and the rest of the commissioners. I thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. My name is Betty Patton, and I live in Portland, Oregon. And I have absolutely no experience in ranching or farming or hunting. My contribution to this conversation is based solely on logic and statistics. I'm simply an interested and concerned citizen wanting to weigh in on this situation. I would like the commission to stop using zones that allow for killing cougars and to follow Oregon voters' decision to stop hunting cougars with dogs. Allowing random killing of cougars in these large areas disrupts the cougar community and family structure, creating additional chaos among the few survivors. This can be substantiated by the knowledge of animal behavior, particularly in large cats. In fact, I learned even more from a radio story this week about their social interdependency. I'm not trying to anthropomorphize the animals, I'm simply trying to convey information about how they interact with each other. What is needed in our situation in Oregon is for humans to take a more active role in protecting the livestock that is under our jurisdiction. Minimize infringement on wildlife habitat. In fact, the city of Prineville just recently increased its urban growth boundary by 30 some odd acres. We're all doing it. It's not just the city of Prineville. That impacts the amount of land available for livestock as well as wildlife. We also need to find benign methodology that protects both wildlife and livestock without harm to either. All approaches to management of the interaction between livestock and wildlife needs to start with accurate cougar counting methodology. The science of population quantification offers accurate approaches that can be utilized in this situation. In my business, which is recycling and solid waste, I did a lot of quantifying recycling and landfill materials. The longer I did it, the better the process became until our modeling was pretty darned accurate. I'm sure that similar methodology advancement happens in animal population counting as well. I rely on the members of the Commission to create the desired outcomes of these regulations, and I encourage the group to create approaches that are logical, justifiable, and sustainable. And finally, thank you all for your time to allow me to express my ideas.
Thank you. Zach.
My name is Zach Russell, and I just got a recommendation that on our hunter reporting, maybe we should start asking the hunters that spend their time out in the field how many cougars they are seeing, because I think that that would be a more accurate number than whatever else anybody's doing. And to have folks from Portland or these metropolitan areas come over to Central Oregon or Eastern Oregon where they don't make it far from the roads or from the highways to give their input on cougar populations or management, I think is irrelevant. That's all I got to say.
Okay. It's when you circle back and you're hunting and you see you're tracked that you do get concerned, right? Yes, sir. Scott.
Thank you, Chair Finley, members of the Commission, and Director Melcher. For the record, Scott Beckstead, Rural Affairs Director and Senior Oregon Director for the Humane Society of the United States. I want to, first of all, express my gratitude to the Department and especially to Derek Broman for his hard work in speaking to a lot of stakeholders and doing his best to accommodate the many varied interests and opinions of those involved. I want to talk briefly about some concerns we have with some of the methodology, but then I want to get to the issue of the target areas. First, it seems to us that the cougar population estimate is extremely high in zones B, C, and E. The density estimates in those zones are at the highest ranges ever recorded anywhere ever, and at least double the densities found in Washington. So we would encourage the department to take a second look at the density estimates in those zones, because basically ODFW is estimating that approximately 4,174 cougars are in those zones, those three zones accounting for 64% of the state's cougar population. We're also very concerned about the very short turnaround time for both peer review and public comment. It seems to us that with the plan being sent out for peer review on September 11th, scientists did not have an adequate opportunity to give the plan a really comprehensive and thorough look. And that concerns us, as does the relatively short turnaround time for public comment. Having said that, let's talk about the target areas. You've heard from people all over the state of Oregon, Pendleton, Lincoln City, Ashland, Medford, Grants Pass, Roseburg, Portland, Salem, Albany, all over the state, overwhelmingly telling you, the policymakers for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, that they object to the use of target zones. And why? Because in target zones, you are indiscriminately killing large numbers of cougars using the two most brutal and inhumane methods available, including a method that was specifically banned by two separate votes of the people of Oregon. And that's really where the rubber meets the road on these target areas. It looks like, it appears very much to folks who voted to ban hound hunting, that the target zones are this department's way of circumventing the will of the people. And so it's our position that the hound hunting needs to stop, the use of strangling wire neck snares need to stop, and I think especially in light of the massive poaching ring that's been exposed, where many of those poachers, in fact I think all of them, are hound hunters, the department needs to ask some serious questions about its use of hound hunters in administrative removals, And to summarize, get rid of the target zones. Take another look at your population estimates to make sure you're not double counting. Rich Beausoleil's comments, I think, are instructive on that issue. And let's start focusing on conserving and protecting our state's cougars rather than treating them as either trophies or pests, because that doesn't square with how most Oregonians feel. We want our cougars conserved, protected, and allowed to thrive. And let's get cougar management back to the cougars themselves, who have historically proven that they are the very best at keeping the cougar population in check. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Commissioners. Commissioner Atkinson.
This is a question for Mr. Beckstead. I appreciate a lot of the comments that you had for us, and I agree it was difficult for me also to just now see the review information from the other researchers that reviewed our plan. But I know you are very concerned about target areas and that they are not a good thing for managing populations of cougars in Oregon, but what's the alternative?
The alternative, thank you for the question, Chair Finley and Commissioner Atkinson. I think the alternative is to stop the pressure of human-caused mortality and let those cougar populations stabilize themselves. What the best available science on cougar biology is showing us is that the more hunting pressure you put on these animals, the more social chaos you create and the more opportunity for conflict you create. Because when and in fact this article I think that Betty Patton referenced on what they're seeing now about cougar interactions, about the cougars they're observing unrelated cougars actually sharing their kill with each other. But these scientists that were in this study that made these observations noted in their study that the territories of the large adult male cougars are the prime indicators of the stability of the cougar population overall, because those big adult males are the ones that are regulating the population. It's when you indiscriminately take large numbers of cougars, including adult females and adult males, out of the picture that you create the social chaos.
But the question is, what's the alternative?
The alternative is stop target area removals, use dogs when there is an actual verified threat by an individual cougar to public safety or property. A great example is the cougar in West Fir outside of Oak Ridge just last week. He showed up, he was underweight, there was clearly something wrong with him. He started taking cats. He was too close to neighborhoods, and so they used dogs to find that cougar and remove him. That seems to me to be exactly the kind of situation that the voters had in mind when they created the exemption. But just to indiscriminately allow the use of hounds against entire populations really is an affront to the values of most of Oregonians.
So, and I appreciate you bringing up the science, because we're certainly interested in focusing on what do we know that's been shown scientifically. But I did want to point out one of the benefits of this plan is that we have a lot of Oregon information, research that's been published that has actually shown the opposite of the study that you mentioned, that showed that that cougar mortality, for example, to protect livestock, that it was shown in Oregon that that was beneficial result of having intensive cougar removal to improve the situation for livestock. So while we all know of studies that show various things, the fact is that sometimes there is variation in studies, and so we do have to look at both sides of the story. And I think it's really important in Oregon that we look at what we've seen in Oregon, not in Washington or other states, as far as research. I mean, all of those research articles are valid, but we can apply our own directly here. And I know you're saying that killing individual offending cougars is your alternative. I'm not sure that adequately addresses all the concerns we have in Oregon for managing cougars. Thank you.
Chair, can I address the comment briefly? Chair Finley and Commissioner Atkinson, I appreciate your comments, and I think that while we're looking at the science and we're looking at the methodology, we also have to look at what is the responsibility of the department to the people of Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I think that the people who voted to ban the hound hunting of cougars feel like the state is ignoring or even thumbing their nose at that ban by allowing the same individuals that were banned from using their dogs to hunt cougars by Measure 18 to be allowed to go in and continue to do it, but with the state's blessing. And so I understand your point too. I hear what you're saying as well, but I think that there is a social and a political consideration and an ethical consideration that needs to be made here.
But you did say that it was okay for someone to use hounds if there was an individual cougar to kill.
Correct, and because that's what I think.
So it's not just that the use of hounds is bad; it's what situation it's used in.
I think that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Weber.
Thank you, Scott. My belief is that you were involved in the drafting of Measure 18.
That's correct.
And in Measure 18, didn't that specifically provide for the use of hounds in administrative removal?
I can tell you that it was certainly never my intention or belief that when we wrote that exemption, we certainly had nothing like the target areas in mind. We had in mind removal of individual offending cougars, not the broad-scale indiscriminate use against entire geographic zones.
Okay, but the use of target zones, does that violate the language that you drafted in Measure 18?
It certainly violates the spirit of it. I understand that because the language says that administrative and management objectives are an exemption. But I can tell you that there were three of us who were involved in drafting that language, and at no time did we ever believe that it would be exploited like this.
But the majority of voters in Oregon voted for the state to be able to use hounds for administrative purposes.
That's true, with the understanding that that was using dogs to remove individual cougars that were causing, some sort of actual problem.
Well, I guess when I remember the Measure 18, I don't remember that particular provision being laid out. It was simply, there was no provision that it would just be for problem cougars. It was that the state could administratively use hounds.
Yeah, and Commissioner Weber, my memory is different from yours. I remember that in the course of that campaign, both the Measure 18 and the Measure 34 campaigns, the conversation was about the use of dogs to address human safety and livestock depredation and so forth.
Now, I also noticed that you mentioned trophy hunting a lot, and I'm trying to figure out what you're talking about.
Are you in my comments?
Right. What kind of activity are you describing when you say trophy hunting?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Weber. Sport hunting of cougars is done for trophies. No one is going out and bagging a cougar so that they can fill their freezer, as what happens with deer and elk hunters. Most of the people who are hunting cougars are going out for trophies, and there is a growing consensus among the non-consumptive user that trophy hunting is inherently unethical because it's not being done for any management objectives. It's being done for the purpose of bragging rights and a trophy, and so it's definitely a concern.
So I guess what you define as trophy hunting is any hunter that shoots a cougar is a trophy hunter.
I think that's a fair statement, yes. I think that most people who are, in fact, almost all the people that are going out to hunt a cougar are doing it with the objective of collecting a trophy.
Well, if I go out and I have a cougar, I think the statistics as laid out in the plan is most hunters are not specifically hunting cougars. It's just something that appears while you're hunting something else. Would you agree with that?
Commissioner Weber, I think it's true that most of the cougar tags are being sold as part of the sportsman's package, that where if you buy like a deer and elk tag, you also get, the cougar tag that goes with it. So in that respect, yes, I think what you're saying is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Scott, usually the Oregon citizens get the published background or measure explaining each measure. Do you happen to have in your files somewhere Measure 18 where there's actually discussion to help the voters understand? I would just be interested to see what was written up by the proponents and the opponents. The voters pamphlet, yeah.
Chair Finley, I'm sure we could get our hands on that.
Yeah, just for interest.
Sure.
Because it was a fruitful discussion you were having, but the only thing to go back to is the written proponents' language, which they initiated, and then those who opposed it.
Yeah, and Chair Finley, it's been, 23 years, so those are we have to dust up those memory banks. And
I tell you what, I'm such a rat packer, I would have it if I...
Well, I'm sure I have it, but I'm sure I'd have to go rummaging,
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, panel, thank you very much,
Thank you.
all of you. Last call for Mr. Wes York. Okay, Mr. York is excused. Cindy Davis, Mike Thomas, and Janine Jellicure, come forth. Okay. All of your addresses are legible, thank you. So we'll just start by identifying your name, and we'll start with you, Cindy. 3 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Finley, Commissioners, and Director Melcher. My name is Cindy Davis. I live in Bend, Oregon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
And I'm here, I don't represent, but we live on the east side of Bend and have ranchettes and run livestock. And what I wanted to do is have our voice heard today. We're not from the city, but we actually understand the conflict. And I appreciate the effort that's gone into the management plan, and I know that hearing both sides is complicated and takes an awful lot of time. So I appreciate your time this morning to listen to my comments. Oregon voters have stated twice that we don't want cougars hunted with hounds. The wishes of the people have been circumvented by using volunteer houndsmen to track and kill large numbers of cougars in target zones, which are part of the Oregon Cougar Management Plan. And if that's not bad enough, federal trappers are hired to kill even more cougars with strangling neck wire snares. In our opinion, this is animal abuse, pure and simple, and it's an outrageous insult to the humane values of Oregon. As a predator myself, I can't imagine being hung by the neck and strangled until I'm dead. I think we can do better than that. We've also shelled out about $500,000 to pay for these killing operations. So I ask you this morning to please, it's time to listen to the people of Oregon. Please get rid of the target zones. Please adopt a policy that allows dogs to be used when cougars pose an actual threat to people or property. Please listen to the scientists who know that the more you hunt cougars, the more you create conflicts between cougars and people. And finally, I'd like you to consider the fires that have impacted the state of Oregon this year and its impact on wildlife numbers, so perhaps that might need to be revisited. I thank you for your time and allowing me to speak to you this morning.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. Mike.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. In light of the current policies, we actually, we live on the, my wife and I live on the west side of Eugene, and every now and then we have cougar spottings. They come through the neighborhood. There's a small cattle farm across the street from us. No calves have ever been taken by any of the animals cruising through. We just try to live in harmony, take normal precautions. You know, if it's midnight, you're letting your dog out in the backyard, keep an eye on that rascal. And I mentioned that there's never been an attack on a cow-calf. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but in our neighborhood it hasn't. I also question somewhat the density estimates for cougars in the state. I'd like more attention paid to the current science behind really eliminating these target zones. It just doesn't seem to work. It just throws the entire population in chaos, and I actually think it'll increase any type of incidents. I'm definitely for a more humane approach. The neck snares, the dog hunting, that's, I don't know, that just doesn't seem Oregonian to me. It doesn't seem fair. And then I'd like to emphasize where other people have about voting twice to eliminate the hunting with hounds. And I think one of the first speakers, Al LePage, I realize as a commission you don't want to be violating any type of laws. I think Al was trying to get more of the spirit of the law. With great respect for the commission, and I don't think anybody thought you were violating any type of laws. One other thing, the reference to not documenting any cougar attacks on humans, that's just what it means. There might have been that incident in '71. That was not 100% documented, so I think that comes into play also. That's all I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Janine.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Janine Joliker. I am a rural ranch and farm owner. I am also a Parks Commissioner for the City of Scappoose and have served on numerous boards throughout the state of Oregon, and so I appreciate all the hard work and effort that you people have to make every day in making the trip out to Prineville, and thank you for taking the time for allowing us to speak. I'm here to speak out against committing violence against cougars and wildlife with the latest attempt by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to use hounds and traps to kill cougars and other animals in the proposed target zones that this hearing is addressing today. In spite of the fact that Oregonians have repeatedly stated by voted mandate that we do not want cougars hunted and exterminated in this barbaric and cowardly way, ODFW continues to circumvent the will of the Oregonians by trying to sneak in measures to do exactly that. This is especially frustrating given the fact that no person has ever, in the history of our state, has ever been killed by cougars. I don't know about attacks, but I know that for a fact. There have been repeated scientific studies and papers done showing that the so-called predator control is not effective in reducing livestock losses on privately owned cattle, sheep, or goats. But because the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife wants to cater to only 6% of Oregonians that commit violence against wildlife and animals in our state in the form of hunting, they continue to ignore the 94% of us that do not kill animals for fun or for recreation. We don't do it. And the latest attempt is not based on any increase in predators killing livestock, but because ODFW claims that there have been more sightings of cougars and bears in the state. There are also lots of people that claim to see Bigfoot and aliens, but beings from outer space and hairy fabled apes are not labeled as game animals, so they are safe for now. ODFW will tell you that hunting licenses help manage wildlife populations and fund conservation efforts, but the facts are that hunting has been on the decline for decades, and I like to think it's because Oregonians are decent, compassionate people. We don't want to kill animals. We want to hike and camp with our families and children in Oregon's wilderness. We want to shoot animals and wildlife with our cameras and observe their home in a respectful and thoughtful manner. We need to realize that there's also a small minority of ranchers that will tell you that cougars and wild animals are killing their livestock and are requesting increased funding for federal control. Ranchers speak for killing wildlife, as well as compensation for livestock losses to be paid for by Oregonian and federal tax dollars. While those of us running businesses can only dream of that kind of welfare for losses occurred in the course of doing business, Oregon ranchers feel entitled to our hard-earned taxpayer dollars, as well as using our public lands for their business at a greatly reduced cost. This will be bleeding. When is this bleeding going to stop? ODFW would tell you that hunting licenses are on the decline because Oregon is becoming more urban, but here I stand, a rural ranch and farm owner whose property abuts a wildlife superhighway on the Coast Range, telling you that I don't hunt and I don't want you to indiscriminately kill predators and wildlife. I should also note that I lived in Africa, a country that has real predators. But in Africa, most hunting has been exchanged for ecotourism and photo safaris that are far more profitable and better for the place I once called home. The Maasai of the Serengeti have been ranchers for millennia and live with lions, leopards, hyenas, and numerous other predators in the African bush. They understand that the rare losses are a part of doing business and have a deep respect and reverence for wildlife.
You're out of
A
time.
level of respect that is, I'm almost finished.
No,
that
you're
is starkly-
39 minutes, 39 seconds over.
Okay.
Okay?
Do you have any
Gave you
questions?
39 seconds over.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any questions or comments, commissioners? All right, thank you, Pat.
Thank you for your time.
Is it Courtney Dillard? Jenny Dressler? Lynn Cullens? Your addresses are all here and correct?
Yes.
Let's see, who are we missing? The last. Oh, here, we're here, we're here. Okay. All right, just state your name. You have 3 minutes, and we'll start with you, Courtney.
Great. Thank you, Commission Chair Finley and members of the Commission and Director Meschler for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Courtney Dillard. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I teach civic communication and media at Willamette University. As a professor of communication, I do a fair amount of research in the area of strategic planning, and I want to talk about the importance of audience analysis and understanding who your audience is when planning for a sustainable future for your organization. I would argue that one of the most important factors in this planning is trying to align yourself with the values of your audience so that you can better engage them and have them support you in the long run. I am here to encourage the Commission to recognize that the updates to the Cougar Management Plan under consideration, especially its inclusion of hunting methods using dogs, is not in line with ODFW's primary audience, Oregon citizens. The plan should be reconsidered to better reflect the attitudes and values of the majority of Oregonians. As the Commission, you've already heard that voters have voted twice to prohibit hunting cougars with dogs. That was quite some time ago, as already been noted, and the original plan that we're talking about today was drafted in 2006. Since that time, a lot of things have happened. So since 1994, our population, the population of Oregon, has grown by about 1 million people, and most of those people have been moving to the urban centers. At the same time, there's a lot of evidence that the majority of Oregon citizens today favor strong animal wildlife protection measures, as we saw with the passing of Measure 100 by over 70% of Oregonians, or close to 70% of Oregonians across the state. The people of Oregon have also been very vocal about asking ODFW to protect wildlife as a priority. Recently, as you all know and are aware, Responsive Management surveyed Oregonians about their attitudes and values for the Oregon Legislative Task Force on funding for fish, wildlife, and related outdoor recreation and education. When asked what ODFW priorities should be, they found that for Oregon residents, quote, purely ecological efforts are at the top of priorities. These include conserving and restoring fish and wildlife habitat, protecting endangered species, and protecting and restoring native fish and wildlife species in Oregon. There's also a lot of other evidence that Oregonians are opposed to lethal methods for predator control, and the number of hunters have declined in the state, and efforts to try and get hound hunting as a possibility back on the ballot has failed. So when we think about all of these facts, I think it's clear that Oregonians in 2017 are even more opposed, likely to be even more opposed to the practice of hunting cougars with dogs. I want to conclude by talking about the possibility of something that has not yet occurred but very well could. That is undercover video being taken of hunters treeing and killing cougar. That video surfacing and being used by Oregon media, Oregon citizens seeing video of this activity, and I think we all know there would be quite a lot of outrage that ODFW is sanctioning that kind of activity. So if such a video was to arise, I think you would see the outrage that it would produce. So I'd like to leave you considering that.
Okay, thank you. Jenny.
Thank you. There we go. Chair Finley, members of the Commission, and Director Melcher, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jenny Dressler, and I represent the Oregon Farm Bureau Federation. We are the state's largest general ag association, representing about 7,000 farm and ranch families in Oregon. Today we are here to testify and to speak to the Oregon Cougar Management Plan. As you are all aware, since the passage of Measure 19, cougar numbers have appeared to double across the state. And while our farm and ranch families have suffered from increased depredation, we know from a lot of the stories in the media over the past couple of years that rural Oregonians aren't the only ones struggling with increased cougar numbers. Earlier this year, there were cougar sightings in and around schools and neighborhoods in the Portland metro area, I think in Troutdale, Tigard, and Tualatin. I hear from producers about depredation pressures that are increasing, and particularly in Western Oregon, Douglas and Lane counties are really struggling with depredation on their flocks, particularly with the lambs. That is why we're here today to support a strong and balanced cougar management plan. We ask for your support of 3 key areas. The first is to continue to maintain an emphasis on livestock damage in the plan. Objectives 3 and 4 were consolidated in the plan, and I think that this simplifies, hopefully this simplifies the plan for some of the stakeholders and wildlife managers, and that brings livestock management into one objective. We believe that this decision is supported by science. The Hiller et al. Paper and the Beulah management plan, or the Beulah target area, both provide support for consolidation, and it keeps an important focus on livestock loss resulting from cougar depredation. Our second point for us is to retain target areas as a cougar management tool. Compared to other states, Oregonians have few tools to address cougar depredation, and target areas continue to be a powerful tool to assist in hazing efforts on the farm and ranch. And we also urge you to retain these target areas as an adaptive tool that focuses on cougar livestock conflicts. For our members, this is an increasing issue. Finally, our members urge you to keep this plan adaptive as Oregon's cougar population continues to increase, including assurances regarding how large this population can grow. That's a continued concern for our membership. As a final point, we really do appreciate the efforts by your staff, by Derek, to build out the science that is in this plan. I know he spent probably countless hours building out the literature review, and our members have asked for science-based management, and we believe that that's what you have in the appendices. We also appreciate the department's commitment to transparency in the designation of target areas. We see these as a powerful tool, and transparency in a public process provides the public with the same window into their effectiveness. So we appreciate the opportunity to provide our comments today and respectfully ask that you endorse the update to the Cougar Management Plan. Thank you.
Please contain yourself. We're not in a theater. This is a business meeting. Okay, Lynn.
Good morning, Commissioners and Chairman Finley. My name is Lynn Cullens, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mountain Lion Foundation. We're a nationwide nonprofit organization who are dedicated to protecting cougars and their habitat. I want to speak to a number of issues, and I'll try, but I will try to be brief. I first want to thank your staff. I think that and the department for their efforts on this plan. I know that by reading our comments, you may not have perceived that we appreciated that, but I think that part of the problem that we wanted to bring to your attention is that there were a couple things that led to the plan that we see today. One is that staff were directed to update a plan rather than to come up with a new plan which might be more effective. And the other is, and in fact that plan, that original plan was created before we had much of the new information, new scientific research representing cougar populations, especially with regard to the social structures that were mentioned by Mr. Beckstead. At the mountain lion workshops that were mentioned by one of the other speakers, there was an overview of all of the western states. In that overview, there was concern over the fact that while trophy hunting and human-caused mortality in all western states had leveled off since the 2013 mountain lion workshops, Oregon's mortality numbers continued to rise at what we believe is an unsustainable rate. And that testimony and that presentation was by agency personnel. There were a couple in the workshop. And this is my primary concern and the primary concern of my organization. I think if we step back from the detail, the concern here is that the Oregon human-caused mortality of mountain lions has increased, and yet as has been mentioned, the number of sightings and the number of complaints have increased. And so the question is, why would we want to continue the same, this failed plan, what we perceive to be a failed plan, in light of the fact that with heavy take of cougars on your landscape, the problems do not appear to be resolved. We want to echo the concerns that were brought to your attention by Rich Beausoleil, one of your experts. We believe strongly that the numbers of cougars that have been estimated in the state are vastly inflated. And we want to echo the hope for revision of zones B, C, and E that was mentioned by Scott Beckstead, as well as his request that you halt the use of target zones.
And you're out of time. Thank you. Commissioners. Commissioner Woolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimonies. And I've just maybe a similar question that Commissioner Atkinson posed earlier, and I would just also direct it to the Mountain Lion Foundation in terms of alternatives. You know, it is sort of a basic tenet that if you keep doing things the same way and things aren't improving and you keep doing them the same way, then the outcomes will be the same. So I just wanted to, and that's a tenet of yours. So I wanted to get some perspective from your organization of what you believe could or should be done differently.
I would agree with Mr. Beckstead that, in fact, the best way to manage livestock and pet conflicts, conflicts between cougars and domestic animals, is to utilize first non-lethal measures, and only in the case where those do not resolve a problem, lethal measures, but always targeted at the specific situation. And I would add to his comments that if there are specific situations where a particular location or operation year after year is resulting in the take of a cougar because of conflict, that we really need to look beyond lethal measures in order to resolve that conflict. Because in the long term, and I think time is an issue that wasn't brought up by some of the other speakers, that in the long term, killing a single cougar doesn't resolve an ongoing conflict issue. And so this is one of the reasons why we point to these non-lethal measures. It's not just because we're bleeding hearts. It's because I truly believe that the way to protect people, pets, and livestock is to actually make changes in human behavior. Because another cougar will move into that area. They are opportunistic hunters. And as long as we're providing them with the smorgasbord of opportunities, they're going to take that opportunity potentially at least once in every cougar's lifetime. This is something, again, that we're newly learning in the past decade. So, you know, it is a complex issue. There is no silver bullet. But I do believe that we need to take a broader perspective and to really look at the large-scale science. While I understand that Oregon studies show sometimes an immediate reduction in conflict, of course that's going to be true when you remove a cougar in a particular area, or if you take them down, you know, in terms of removing 50 or 60% of the population. Yes, you're going to see a temporary reduction, but over the long term, if you want sustainable populations and you want reduced conflicts, the responsibility falls on the human side to make changes in the way we operate. And I do want to mention one other thing that I think was really interesting and important within the plan itself, and I want to applaud the department for bringing this to our attention, but that is that there is growth of ranchette properties, small project and hobby operations in backyards that are quite different than the traditional ranching activities that we believe are economically impacted by cougar conflicts. And I think it's very important as Oregon moves forward that you draw a distinction, because what you do in response to the conflicts in a ranchette situation for a 4-H project with a few goats or sheep unprotected in a backyard is very, very different than the understandable response by a traditional rancher. We have a lot of empathy for traditional ranching operations, which are under the gun in a number of ways.
Okay,
so those are my responses. I think that's an important distinction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Okay, thank you, Penn. Okay, Derek. Commissioner Buckmaster.
Derek, thank you. I have a question on our objective 4, where you're talking about, it's about a word, where evidence indicates cougar predation is a primary factor, may be targeted for cougar population reduction. We use the word primary a couple times in objective 4. Are we, and maybe this is a question that I could also get Commissioner Weber and or Aaron to focus or to comment on. Primary, I think, means the first. You look at the definition, and so is that word, does it have to be the first, the most important factor, that would trigger this, or does it have to be determined that it is a major factor? I'm just concerned that that word is going to limit your ability to move forward, or will be challenged on how you determine it is the single greatest factor. And so maybe our lawyers could help me with that as well.
Can you take a second to direct me exactly at the language that you're looking at?
Well, I'm looking at the statement of need and fiscal impact. It occurs other places, but that was the easiest one at the beginning of our documentation. And we have objectives, 4 objectives, 2017. It comes on the, I believe, second page of the statement of need and fiscal impact. The language is consistent throughout the plan, though, using the word primary. But here at Objective 4 seeks to achieve establish management objectives for other game mammal, where evidence indicates cougar predation's primary factor may be targeted. For bighorn sheep, areas around specific herds will be targeted when evidence indicates cougar predation is a primary factor. So my question is do we mean primary as defined by Webster's?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Buckmaster, to get at your overarching question, no, the intent is not, it is the #1 king of the mountain, the only thing at hand. It is actually in the objective we use the term significant factor, a significant factor, not the significant factor. Even in discussion of the primary, it's a primary, not the primary. So the intent is it is a major component. As we all know, trying to get down and identify if it is the most influential, that's very challenging. Even when we throw every model at the wall and see what sticks, we're still saying, well, the model says this one is a sensitivity analysis, this one appears to have the most influence, but we know everything is in consideration. We know habitat, we know weather, we know all sorts of things are major factors.
Well, thank you, Derek. I'm fine with that, and I think I think it's easy to argue that there is a primary factor. There are not primary factors there. So let's make sure that we're clear in our language on exactly what we're trying to do on that one. And that was the only thing I had.
Okay. Commissioner Weber.
In a follow-up to Commissioner Buckmaster, I guess when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking we want it to be a significant factor. Using the word primary would, in my mind, tend to elevate it to a higher level than, like the #1. Mm-hmm. And I would be concerned with that. And I don't know. It may be the Full Employment Act for lawyers, but I would just as soon try and make it as clear what we mean as we can.
And I'll admit that, too, the use of significant oftentimes in the field, people think significant meaning statistical significance. So it's just a war of words and which ones work best to try to really genuinely describe the situation at hand.
And yeah, picking out the right word, we could say not de minimis or something, you can almost describe it. I think that we want it to be, a factor that is more than a slight factor, but not necessarily the primary factor.
Anyone else? Derek, I was interested in the Jackson County target area, since that's my backyard. And I actually hunt in many of the areas within the target area. I know where we have livestock with BLM permits and so forth. But I'm interested in what's the threshold for action? When does someone go out and set a snare? Is there, you know, before I would commit resources to any effect, whether it was an undercover law enforcement operation or something, I had an objective in my mind. I knew where we were going to go do a stakeout and so forth. So what triggers this? Who makes the decision? Who decides to ask Wildlife Services to go what area? Help the audience and help me through that. Please tell me it's not just helter-skelter, because I've seen Wildlife Services do that personally.
Chair Finley, in that process, so certainly it's first important to acknowledge that there are statutes that allow the public to address conflict that is currently occurring. So again, one of the things we updated in this draft was an emphasis of those situational occurrences, where we're not talking about target area, larger areas, enacting agents, taking animals that are in the area of concern. So if you're a public resident, if you've got a cougar issue, you contact our district office. They are collecting that information. It gets recorded in our damage database. They are evaluating the situation to recommend the best solution. As we're discovering many times, it's just educating the public, and they think that they have a problem, and the reality is they may not actually have a problem. They just saw a cougar. And so each situation is different. So our staff, if they believe that the situation has elevated, that now warrants the lethal removal of that animal, they inform the public what they are capable of, what they are allowed to do. Certainly their location dictates what they can and cannot do, especially if they reside within city limits. They might be restricted. And then based again on that location, it's up to the district to try to determine what assistance they can provide. Perhaps they can get that person in touch with a Wildlife Services agent or some other public member, because public members can serve as agents for landowners. So they could actually get in touch with a neighbor or somebody that could assist them with that problem. Or ODFW staff can get directly involved.
Okay, so I understand making decisions. An observed cougar, a frequently observed cougar. But is there written criteria that they have to meet, a sequence, before you pull the pin? Or is it just my best guess as a field person? You know, where's the risk assessment? What is the risk assessment?
Chair Finley, I think that there's a number of information in the current plan that addresses that question. In the appendices, we have the Cougar Incident Response Guidelines that lay out what are those criteria. Once those boxes are checked or identifies those thresholds, now this warrants the response. And certainly that is always an interest of all researchers and the public, and they're interested to know, can we get more detailed in recognizing those events? And two, I think that's where it's imperative to tap into human dimensions, because if we see a cougar that does not exceed those thresholds as we've identified them, but we come to learn that the public has much lower thresholds, then that's good feedback for us to know, okay, in this particular situation, we may need to be a little bit more willing to act. But based on the content and a couple books that have come out, the Cougar Management Guidelines and Managing Cougars in North America, they have a lot of good content. I believe we're going to be updating one of those books as well. And so the research on recognizing those concerning behaviors is continually out there, and we'll continue to tap into that on what people know as concerning behaviors.
Yeah, I saw that supplement. I wanted the audience to be aware that there is published criteria, because I don't hear that kind of testimony. I didn't hear testimony from the audience that says, I was looking at your criteria and you missed this, or you understated this, or you overstated that. I usually ask the members of the public that come before us to make sure that they're actually helping us in our management. And often we hear, I don't like cougar management. Well, did you really look at the guidelines? What is the department missing? Is it too broad, too narrow? What are you trying to help us do in managing this? That's effective public testimony. We appreciate it, and we actually use it. So, commissioners, Commissioner Woolley.
So I have a number of questions. I'll just ask one now, and just because it's more of a maybe more of a communication and philosophical question. So, obviously, there's a big disconnection going on, and as Paul Newman famously quoted in Cool Hand Luke, what we have is a failure to communicate. And unfortunately, summarily, he was shot right after he said that. But what we're seeing, and as you've heard in public comment and in our written testimony, and I won't reiterate all of it, but that 99, I think probably 99% of our written testimony is saying the same thing. That people are against target areas, people that want to stop hunting with dogs and snares. People feel that the spirit, not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law has been circumvented based on what the public believed, how the law would be implemented. So this is the communication question. What can you tell all of these people? How can you explain to them the perspective of our department in terms of continuing these methods, and the concerns of the Oregon Hunter Association, the concerns of the agricultural community? How, if the vast majority of the people are simply misunderstanding what our department believes to be true, and some organizations feel to be true, how do you bridge that? What if these 99% or 94% were in the room right now? What would you tell them to help them to understand, your perspective, the perspective of the department, that they need to come your way, or they need to come the way of our department in terms of what our plan is proposing? What would you tell them?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Woolley, good question. That's very challenging, and we face it on numerous fronts where there's misinformation, miscommunication, and sometimes, our district staff deal with it on a regular basis. They're educating the public on various topics, and then the next day the person has forgotten or doesn't like the information. But I think the dialogue heard today is actually incredibly valuable, because to address those individuals and to describe the situation, there's a logical process to follow. Based on our statutes and rules and the plan, that's how we get to where we are. That's a lot of difficult conversation to try to talk about statutes, rule, policies. People just glass over pretty quickly. So to explain that target areas are not hunting, this is not a trophy activity, this is not that the agents do not get to retain that animal. The agent process is extremely difficult. It's defined in rule. One of the biggest challenges to implementing a target area is finding people that can qualify as agents. So there's multiple components and nuances in this whole big picture that it's just so difficult to, where do you start? And it's so easy to get hung up in little transitions and sidebars and confusion. But I think that many would come out of listening today would understand what that statute says, what it allows, and then it's the interpretation of the agency. I think that that's really where the issue is, you know, if they talk about the spirit of the statute, we don't really work in spirits. We have to follow what the law says, even if, you know, a new law has some issues. We have to fit underneath that. So if I'm having a one-on-one conversation that they are maybe misinformed, I can set the record straight, but I may not still change their mind. They still may not like these activities. They may not like these management tools. They may not like the results, and that's fine. But if they can come out understanding where we're coming from, that ultimately would be a great goal. But unfortunately, it's a long process to wade through all of that. When we do work with the public, you know, we try to set the record straight. We try to have them come out of the conversation informed. But large-scale outreach on some of these topics are very challenging, and I don't know how we would get that out there, because these things are in law. These are facts. Without making it look like we're defensive or accusational, it's oftentimes on these smaller scales, and continuing to have a good connection with our stakeholders may be the very best strategy, because as we get in touch with their representatives, hopefully that can filter down, because they ultimately are some of the best information providers for their membership. So if the information is accurate at their levels, ideally that information will go through that membership and be accurate. But then it still may be misunderstood or just some confusion from the folks represented in those groups. So very complicated, difficult answer to a tough question, and we may need to continue on this.
Yeah, it could come down to who's misunderstanding whom, you know. Okay, thank you for now.
Commissioner Akins.
Thank you. First, I wanted to express thanks for everybody who came and testified today. It's a long drive for a lot of you, and we really value hearing from everyone, as well as the written comments that we receive. The cougar management is a difficult issue because there are so many different sides to the situation, but you know, we value everyone's input, but our overall goal at the end of the day is to balance those needs and desires of all of our people in Oregon. And so the result that we come up with may not be exactly what you had in mind, but recognize that we do have to balance all sides of the situation to manage the cougars for all Oregonians. I wanted to say I really think this plan that's been put together is really a positive update for ODFW. I particularly like the update on recent research. I think all of us have been saying, look, we want to manage by science. We want to know as much information as possible before making decisions. That update was really beneficial, as well as really incorporating a lot more of the Oregon research and data. I really appreciated seeing that, and some of our own published research is different from what we're hearing from other states, and I think it's important to look at what we have found right here in Oregon. The target areas are controversial for a lot of people. They're controversial for me. I really appreciated having much greater detail in the section about target areas. I think it's very transparent. It clearly shows that every situation where we've used target areas has not met our goals. It also shows specifically some of the problems, whether it was not being able to kill enough cougars, or whether it was because of land use patterns, or a variety of things. It's really important that we all get to look at that data and see where we are with target areas. despite the fact that they have not always been successful, I think we need to maintain target areas as a tool for Oregon for managing cougars. Personally, I don't see that we necessarily want to do them large scale, but the intent of our plan is adaptive management. We don't know all the answers, and I think this is a tool that we can keep refining to use in specific situations to try to improve management. So I really am glad that we do have that additional information in the plan that helps all of us on all sides to understand the target area issue. And I encourage this staff to continue monitoring long-term some of these populations that we have had as target areas, and I believe that is the intent and that's written in the plan. So thank you for those changes, and I'm very supportive of this plan.
Okay. Commissioner Biddle.
Jerry, my question, what do you feel that the cougar population, I read the information we got, as far as the elk, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, pronghorn, they don't seem to be as interested in those. I mean, they're rare as far as, prey. What do you, how do you feel about what the cougar population is doing to the deer population? Because that seems to be their biggest prey.
Chair Finley, Commissioner Biddle, yes, even in our research in northeastern Oregon, we're finding out that cougars are selecting more for deer than elk. Even we see a difference between males and females. Larger male cougars are more capable of taking elk, so they'll take more elk than a female cougar will. The reason why some of these target areas for deer are so messy is that it is very difficult to measure the response, because when it comes to elk, cougars are typically preying on calves. And so you're going to be able to see that ratio of cow to calf change pretty drastically with fewer predators on the landscape. Whereas deer, they'll prey on both young and adults, so you're affecting both sides of that equation, both sides of that ratio, so it makes it very challenging. But as we all know, the Commission's heard it many times, when it comes to deer management, it is a tricky, tricky game. The relationship between deer and weather and habitat, and that situation changes county by county in this very diverse state. So we know that oftentimes cougars are preying on deer more than any other prey species, but we all at the same time know that there's a lot of major factors affecting deer. And so in any given situation, it's never exclusively cougars, nor is it never exclusively weather. There's so many things to take into consideration. So that is a primary interest. It's just, as we're proposing target areas moving forward, there's a couple more bits of criteria that I think are going to be necessary for us to be making decisions on those types of events. But it'll continue to be a primary interest in cougar management and in deer management.
Well, the reason I ask that is because, and I know this isn't the time, but wolves are next, and it's such a fine balance point for the state as a whole, and especially where Holly went and what she was trying to explain. It's not easy, and I was just I'm concerned because we talk a lot about goats in the backyard and livestock, and I'm all in on that, but we don't seem to spend enough time on what's going on with our game, which helps bring revenue to the state, which some of the letters we get, there's people out there that hate this department because all they see is raised fees, because chances are less and less. I've really been shocked, because I'm in the fishing industry, but I'm really been shocked about the opportunities to hunt, and they are minimal compared to what they used to be. So as far as being able to control our predators, it's definitely not easy, and it's a challenge. And I admire the department for stepping forward and doing that, because you're never going to be right, no matter what your choice is. So, but anyway, that's my concern was the deer.
Chair Finley, Commissioner Biddle. I fully agree, and that's why we are doing research in northeastern Oregon, trying to look at the relationships between predators and prey. And that's why the plan identifies trying to continue to better identify those relationships and measure them and predict what might be occurring on the landscape. So that's still going to be a high priority. I'm very proud that a number of our research projects conducted around the state have enormous amounts of application to them. They're not research for research's sake. It's stuff that we will be able to implement as soon as we feel comfortable to do so. So that's a big part of this plan, is to recognize what's going to happen next, because we know that our stakeholders are very, very interested in that.
Thank you.
Mr. Woolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Derek, I have a few kind of smaller, easier to answer questions. So I'd have to kind of flip through as I go along, but they're just kind of very specific things. So with cougar interactions with ungulates, in that section, there was some information about revenue generated from hunting that's important to rural communities. So it looks like the most recent work on that is almost 20 years old. So I wanted to know if there is an interest in updating. We talked about the sale of gear to vendors. Has there been any update in revenue data since 1988 based on today's dollars?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Woolley, we update those numbers and account for inflation. Just in September for our big game regulation adopted, the fiscal associated with that presents those numbers, granted making a number of assumptions, but trying to understand what the current dollar is. I don't know if there's been other conversations with our economists about trying to replicate an effort like that. Certainly with even discussion on alternative funding, those similar type of investigations I think would be of value, but I'm not familiar if there's anything on the horizon.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'll flip over a couple of things. So there's been mention of, let's see if I can find it, Cooley et al., Managing Cougars in North America. I think our Chair Finley mentioned this study as well, which is one of some of the more recent, more comprehensive bodies of work. And there's the concept in that work about the zone concept, hunting, harvest opportunities, refuge zones. We talked about refuge zones. I know right now in Oregon, what would be considered refugia would be, federally designated areas like wilderness areas and things like that. Has our department started to discuss any areas outside of wilderness areas or national parks that could potentially sort of be designated as refuges? We talked about refuges and sinks and how to look at those in perspective. So I just want to get a sense of where the department may be going with any maybe preliminary discussions about that.
Chair Finley, Commissioner Woolley, I first apologize for flickering things while you were speaking.
No, that was fine.
But I'm doing so to address this question. So, and I get really excited, so please give me a red light if I need to stop. That's a big topic in cougar management in North America and South America, is these identifications of potential zones and need for designated areas where they serve as, hunting is prohibited for some sort of duration. In areas where there's higher take, there's different tools available, the need is higher for those types of areas, so you can have these functional sources and sinks. Montana is actually looking at doing some pretty impressive stuff where they have designated sources, designated sinks. They've done habitat analyses, they've looked at corridors, they've done some genetic work, and they're going to be doing some scat dog analyses, maybe it's biodart analyses, every so many years. So they have these designated units of here's where we're going to increase harvest, here's where we're going to back off. In Oregon, in many cases, it does not appear that we have harvest high enough to almost necessitate true refuges. It's certainly something of consideration. Ken Logan, who chimed in on our comments, he's big on trying to designate areas of refuge and even try to define what is the minimum and maximum size that you need for those types of areas. So there's going to be a lot of major focus on that topic moving forward. Here in Oregon, through efforts like a habitat assessment, And by looking at areas of harvest, one of the individuals that provided testimony mentioned hunters don't venture very far off the road. So if I were to plot on this map all the locations of cougar mortalities, you'll see these vast areas of roadless areas where humans don't really venture. So we talk about these de facto refugia. They're essentially refuges not by design or by rule. They just essentially, nobody goes in there. The Chetco, Southwest Oregon, we have a biologist here that can talk about how few people venture into some of those areas to go hunting, yet there's fantastic habitat for cougars, bears, and other species. So that is actually an interest of mine moving forward, is defining some of these areas just to kind of get a confirmation that they are adequately spaced and adequately sized around the state to confirm that we have animals capable of moving places if there's a gap that's created.
And I can hear your excitement just with background in conservation biology and the whole island biogeographic theory and all of that. I can tell you get pretty revved up about it. So I think that's, so I'm just curious. Maybe just a couple of other quick things. Maybe I'll just mention a couple of maybe just almost grammatical kinds of things. I used to do editing work. Under cougar bobcat interactions, 7th line down, you just want to have THEIR instead of THERE on that. That's a really common thing that people do. So I'm not. And then the page 15, cougar wolf interactions. I think you left a word out. 3rd line down. Interactions between cougars and wolves have been widely, comma, but definitively. Did you probably mean widely observed, or have been observed widely? Just wanted to make sure you get that.
Yes.
I think a lot of other things have been covered by commenters. So I'll let that know. I mean, I have concerns about just in terms of predation on ungulates, that just a lot of other factors, there's so much inconclusive information. We have a lot of new research, and that's great, as Commissioner Atkinson said, and it's good that we have studies now that are in Oregon. Of course, animals don't see our lines on a map as far as whether studies happens in Oregon or Washington or Idaho. More important, of course, is the landscape, the prey base, the geography that we're talking about versus exactly what state that the study occurred in. But I would just hope that in looking at these predator-prey interactions and depressions in populations of whether it's a deer or elk, since most studies are non-conclusive in terms of specifically targeting cougars, that there's a way to, and again, it's a big modeling thing that costs a lot of time and money, but trying to factor in some of these other factors with weather, and sometimes saying that either the modeling is too complex or the public wouldn't understand, is that an adequate enough reason to not create some of the metrics that we need, that all of us would be more comfortable with in terms of the decisions that are being made for managing cougars. That's nice.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. I think some of the work you did with the criteria, expanding the specific areas on target areas was well done. I'm going to vote for it this time, but I still have concerns about target areas, and that we really have undertaken the best management we can for all the constituencies that we serve. And so that's just my statement. And I guess I share that with Holly. I heard her say that too. So if there are no other comments, Commissioner Weber.
Oh, I was just going to comment that I appreciate the fact of all the work you've done and all the comments that we've received. But the thing I really like is that we're talking about how to tweak a program with a growing population. There's nobody that said we're going downhill or we're in any danger. And so I feel comfortable with the staff proposal in terms of the tweaks, and I think I can understand the concerns that people have about the target areas, but I also believe that the target areas are critical for gathering information so that we can make better decisions in the future. And without that information, I think we would not be nearly as informed to do that. So I'm supportive of the staff recommendation.
Well, then good. You can make a motion.
He's made all the motions.
Okay.
Buddy down there.
Yeah, I pass.
Commissioner Woolley.
Okay, I've got to flip my pages again.
Gotta find it.
It's option one. I move to amend OAR Chapter 635, Division 1, nope.
Yep.
180 as proposed by staff. Is there any more detail that needs to go into that motion?
No. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved by Commissioner Woolley and seconded by Commissioner Weber. Any further discussions, thoughts?
My only discussion is, I feel that right now the target area strategy is the only one that we have right now. And the vote is going to go to continue it. I feel that we need to take in consideration what the majority of people of the state are concerned about, and my vote will reflect that.
Okay. And there are still a couple of others, and I don't know how many of all the commissioners still have reservations. I know Holly and I do, so I think we need to continue to work on this. All right. All those in favor, we have a motion and a second. Indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Okay. So we have 1 vote against and 5 votes for. So the motion is approved. I could have voted with you, Commissioner Woolley, but I did want to indicate that I think you've come a long way, but we still have some distance to go in terms of addressing these other constituencies. So let's continue to do that. And Director Melcher, you have a couple of things.
Very good. Well, I want to thank Derek too. I think Derek started with us a couple years ago, and immediately among the other assignments, he got handed the Cougar Plan review and amendment and adoption. So I think you've done an exceptional job, Derek. So I really appreciate you carrying the project through the full process. We heard compliments today from literally from constituents on all ends of the spectrum as to your work with them, and so we greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, you did do a good job, so thank you.
As do I. So I wanted to pass that on. I think it's been said that wildlife management is not rocket science. It's a whole lot more complicated, and I think you all can see that as well today. So But moving on to other business, I just had two things that I wanted to mention to the commission before we officially adjourn here. And the Chair Finley, and I have been working on a couple of issues. I wanted to just alert you to these. Chair Finley has asked, and Commissioner Buckmaster has agreed to serve as the commission representative on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. Currently Commissioner Weber serves that role, and Commissioner Weber, his second term on the commission will be up here in the end of February of 2018. So when Commissioner Weber vacates that OWEB seat, Commissioner Buckmaster will be sitting in for the commission. So we just want to make sure you knew that. And then also, of course, coming here in the first weekend of November, I believe it's November 4th, Saturday, November 4th, we have our annual duck stamp, upland bird stamp, habitat conservation stamp, art contest, and viewing at the Duck Pond Cellars in Dundee, Oregon. And Commissioner Bittle has agreed to serve as the commission member of the judging panel. So I wanted to thank Commissioner Bittle for that and just make the commissioner aware. That was it. Chair Finley, I'm
Okay, thank you.
good.
I want to thank you, two sacrificial lambs, for Buckmaster. It wasn't because you were the best, it's because the others didn't want it.
I'm used to that.
Well, no, we want to thank you, Bruce, and it's an important job. I think our field trip yesterday to the dams and the application of OWEB money shows just how important. And I want to thank Commissioner Weber publicly for the work on Opal Springs and what you've done on the OWEB agenda. It's really been good.
Also, I just want to say too, Commissioner Biddle, and also with the duck stamp, it's also a process of elimination. A lot of us have done it already, but it's a lot of fun. You don't have to be an art expert or a wine expert, and you get to see a product at the end of a really nice looking label, and so you'll enjoy it.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
All right, good. We're adjourned.